Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are in the world today. This is The World Today, and I am your host, Rabbi Dr. Sophia Catherine Woodley Ron Rothschild. With me today, we have a special guest, Corey Smith. Mr. Corey Smith is the Executive Director of the Housing Action Coalition in San Francisco. And as we're doing a new series called Saving San Francisco from Yourself, and we are in the process of interviewing profiles in courage, such as Mr. Corey Smith, who are trying to make a difference in San Francisco. Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. One of the things we have, San Francisco has been at this now for many, many years, and the situation is simply a mess. Housing shortage situation is egregious, and public safety concern is egregious, just to name a few of the problems. How is your organization addressing those issues, and also give us a little background about your organization founding and its mission and purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, thank you so much for having me. The Housing Action Coalition is a nonprofit. We are now in our 25th year that does housing advocacy in San Francisco, around the entire Bay Area, in Los Angeles, and in the state capital, in Sacramento. And we do organizing, education, and advocacy on behalf of the housing industry. We support housing at all income levels, meaning we support homeless housing, supportive housing with services for our most vulnerable neighbors. We support low and middle income, deed restricted, affordable housing, and we support market rate mixed income housing. Apartment buildings near trains and jobs is sort of the fundamental philosophy for the organization, and it's the work that we've been doing for 25 years. Thinking about San Francisco specifically, I don't expect that every one of San Francisco's problems will get solved automatically if we were to have built more housing and have an affordable city and affordable region. But so many of the city's problems really do come back to unaffordability at its core. Okay. And the reason our city and frankly our region and state are so unaffordable is we have just not built the amount of housing that we need over the last 40 years to accommodate the number of people that want to live here. So for every 10 jobs that the Bay Area has created since 2000, we build one new home. And because many of these jobs are good paying jobs, and we think a healthy economy is a good thing, those who are able to afford housing, i.e. the higher earners, are the ones that ultimately get the housing stock. And that ends up pushing out the low and middle income individuals. We're not going to be able to stop new people from wanting to live here. And so we just fundamentally believe what we need to be doing is building enough housing to make room for all of the folks that want to live here. And that's a political challenge, and there's some policy details we need to make sure we get right as we make some of these changes. And again, it's not going to solve every problem, but we will not be able to solve any of the problems that San Francisco has unless we build more homes for everybody.
Also, I noticed that you have the old guard, and they call themselves progressives, but to me they're not really progressive. They're basically obstructionists, and every which way you can, they're always blocking housing. They're doing everything to make San Francisco unlivable. How is your organization dealing with that big obstacle? Because that has been a major problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at San Francisco's history and the policy that has come out of different movements, and it's really started in the 1960s into the 1970s with the environmental movement. And many people thought at the time the right thing to do was to just don't do anything, right? If you don't change the physical structures, then we're able to preserve the environment. And that was at the time thought to be a progressive point of view. But as the decades have passed, and as we have seen the outcome of those policy decisions, it is unquestionably not producing equitable results for everybody. And yet, for some reason, some of these self-proclaimed progressives, and it's much more of a political party than an actual policy or advocacy, have ended up in this place where their advocacy or their points of view have not shifted as evidence and data has been presented. So what we end up having is a group of people, and there's very much a horseshoe theory in politics, and I think it's true here, where you have the ultra progressives who are totally supportive of building, say, low income housing or homeless supportive housing, teaming up with the true conservatives who don't want any change. And they basically push this anti-housing, anti-market rate housing point of view that has ended up not working. Like, we've got 40 years of evidence and data that show it's really harmful. We know that in California, cities that build more housing at all income levels see lower levels of evictions and displacement of middle and low income individuals. Now, it's not that building housing is the only thing we need to be doing. There's obviously other safeguards we need to put in place, things like right to counsel, for example, to help protect tenants. Like, those make a ton of sense too, and they don't need to be counter. But for whatever reason, a strong voice in that old guard political world have found it incredibly popular to say housing is bad, and it's just not true. The data says it's not true. Intellectually, we know it's not true. And when we see the outcomes on the street, we know that the last 40 years of policy haven't been working. And so the pro-housing movement has arrived. And it is not entirely, but it is largely fueled by many millennials who are no longer able to afford to live in the Bay Area. And that has really activated a voter base that says building more housing is good. And we're winning. Senator Scott Wiener, one of the real leaders on this, San Francisco Mayor London Breed, another strong housing advocate, have started to push back on that narrative. But being honest, we kind of got our butts kicked politically for 40 years. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we're just starting to win. So it's going to take time to really reverse some of the negative decisions and the housing hole that we have not built for ourselves. But we are winning and we are making progress.
Because one of the things that we always see that they try to use, I noticed that in many areas, like over in the avenues, they come up with some ways to increase density. For example, they might, do a rent out the basement or the rent out different areas. What are some of the ways that what are some of the advocacy you're pushing in the regards of trying to increase density, because that's another way you can increase housing stock. Not everybody want to rent a house. Some people just want to rent a room. So how are you going to address those concerns of people who have different needs?
Yeah, well, when I think about it, and if I'm an individual and I'm looking for a new place to live, the number one thing I want is choices. It would be great just to have options, right? At different income levels. Maybe I have an apartment that I want to pay a little bit more for, a little bit less. Maybe I need more space because I'm starting a family, or smaller space because my kids have left the house and I'm an empty nester and I don't need as much space. So fundamentally, we want options for people. And there's no one type of housing that's going to work for everybody. So we need to be providing as many small housing opportunities, whether they're 1 bedrooms or studios, because we know that there's some people that are going to find that option the most attractive. We need to be providing family housing opportunities as well, 2 and 3 bedroom homes in apartment buildings, condos to allow for growing families, and everything in between. So when we think about housing advocacy, there's sort of 3 areas that the pro-housing movement tends to push. One is funding for subsidized affordable housing, because that's really a lot of the short-term pieces that we need. Process reform. When we're able to streamline the approvals process, it lowers the cost of construction, which is really important. And then the last area, which you mentioned, is zoning or density. Literally just allowing these buildings to be built. And in San Francisco, for example, the significant majority of the city, you can't build a 6-story, 5-unit apartment building. It is quite literally illegal to do under current zoning laws. We're starting to see some efforts in the other direction. In fact, next week at the San Francisco Planning Commission, they're going to consider an item to allow for more density. And when you allow for more density, what you're able to do is the builders that are building will provide the 1 bedrooms, the studios, the 2 bedrooms, the 3 bedrooms. Like, all of that will naturally come forward because that's where the shortage is and that's the options that people want. And if we're able to do that over and over again, allow for more of those housing opportunities, particularly on the west side of San Francisco and around the entire Bay Area. I know we're talking San Francisco. We got to be doing this everywhere. When there are more options for folks, there'll be better results for people as well. And for all of San Francisco's problems, we can actually start to solve some of these because people will have a safe, affordable place to live.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Because speaking of affordable place to live, the issue of these camps along the sidewalks, people just basically making excuses. I mean, they sleep all day and just do drugs all day. How should we deal with that? Because a lot of these individuals out there are just I know people who are poor, but they get up every day and they go and try. They try to do something, even sell cans and bottles. But they get up, they fold the blanket, pull it away, and they go try something. But there are people who just want to sleep all day on the sidewalk and just do drugs. How are we gonna permanently address that issue in San Francisco? Because it's San Francisco seem to have a problem, and people seem to be getting pushed around by what I call them the bullies of the housing business empire. These homelessness people that basically want to push a narrative that they need to be on the street. And so, talk about that for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things again where building new housing will not by itself solve homelessness, but it will be impossible to solve homelessness without building more housing. And so when we talk about the lack of affordability for folks and the social safety net that exists, it is the lack of new homes and options for people that result in the individuals ending up on the street. And we don't get too much into street situations and that type of conversation. Where we are big advocates is we need to be providing every individual with a roof over their head, a safe, affordable place to live. For many individuals I know living on the street, one of the challenges with the housing options that are provided is things like, they're not in a room that's locked by themselves, right? Homeless individuals are way more likely to be a victim of a crime than a perpetrator of a crime. And so when we think about the type of housing we want to make sure we're offering our most vulnerable residents, having things like a room that has a locked door, being able to bring your belongings, not criminalizing homelessness. Like being homeless is not a crime. It is an indication that the world has quite frankly failed you. And at the same time, sleeping on the street is not something that we should accept. It is not okay for society in San Francisco as a whole to say, we're the richest city and the richest state and the richest country of human existence, and we have 1% of our population sleeping on the street. And for whatever reason, some people have decided to accept that. And I just flat out refuse to. We have to be creating enough homes for people. We have to be getting people off of the street into safe and secure housing, give them the job training that they need, give them the drug treatment that they might need, give them the mental health treatment that they might need, and get them back on their feet. The other thing that's really important when we talk about our homeless neighbors, it's critical to understand. Each day that an individual spends sleeping on the street, the probability of them getting back into housing and on their feet goes down. And so when we have more housing options at the very beginning and we can prevent homelessness, we have to be pushing resources there. Because if they're on the street for one day and then a second day and a third day, that domino effect really is real for folks. So if we're able to provide the housing opportunities early on, get folks off the street right away, provide attractive places to live, and as a society say we're not going to let people, the individuals who are suffering on the street, continue to have to live in that conditions. From a pure public safety and public health point of view, it's not something that we can be accepting. And again, nobody living on the street is a criminal because they are homeless. I am not a believer that we have to have a stick in order to make homeless people do something or they would be committing a crime. We need to create alternatives for folks that are compassionate, but in include a roof over their head and safety for individuals. Because once somebody has a safe, secure place to live, then they can get their feet back under them and start to reverse some of the unfortunate consequences and just things that can happen in people's lives.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Just a quick follow-up in that regard. San Francisco currently spends almost $1 billion a year on different homeless outreach, funding to nonprofits, going forward, that's a lot of money. And people like the status quo, and they don't want to get rid of the status quo. And for example, I see spending thousands of dollars a month to pay people to put them up in homeless shelters that build housing. So do you have any, does the organization address the issue of trying to break this this whole idea of the status quo, when we just spend almost $1 billion on homelessness and nothing gets done?
Yeah. I mean, it's in one sense the situation is so complicated, and at the same time it's simple. Like, the solution to homelessness is build enough housing for people. Mm-hmm. There are short and long term things that we need to be doing in order to solve this problem, because it's not just one solution. So things in the short term, just again preventing them from getting on the street in the first place, investing in things like right to counsel is really key, because it can prevent homelessness in the first place. Over the medium to long term, we need to be building as much housing as possible. And the current way that we are approaching not just, frankly, homelessness, but the affordability crisis generally, we're trying only short-term solutions to these things. And we're trying to put out the fire with a squirt gun, where if we were to, again, build a lot of market rate housing, a lot of affordable housing, and a lot of homeless supportive housing, that's like building a brand new fire engine, right? It is a whole new way that we could approach the problem. And from a financial point of view, just kind of pure dollars and cents, we know that it goes farther. We actually know that the money is best spent on the front end, trying to solve sort of these foundational problems, because once individuals end up on the street for weeks or months at a time, that's when the public cost really starts to go up, because individuals are really in a tough situation. And so regardless of, yes, it's the compassionate thing to do, but it's also the smart way for our governments to be spending money. And instead, we don't do that. We're not investing what we need to. And we're showing up with exorbitant amounts of money, trying to solve the problem at the far end with a squirt gun. And it's not efficient. And we're trying to shift some of those things. The federal government is also, it has to step up. The idea that San Francisco can solve homelessness in San Francisco by itself is an absolute fallacy. We need the state to do more. We need the federal government to do a lot more. And then we need all of our neighboring cities around the Bay Area to start working together and start trying to solve this problem collectively, versus everybody just kind of pointing fingers and then lighting money on fire. Even if in the short term it is helping people, it's not solving that big picture macro structural problem that the Housing Action Coalition and others are trying to solve.
Excellent. Final question for you. There's one final question here. There are many states. Utah is a red state. It's a very red state, yet they have addressed the housing issue very effectively. Why can't San Francisco learn from them?
Yeah, I mean, a really good question. I will say one of the factors I think that exists for San Francisco, and this is a California problem, is our government is so fragmented and we don't do a good job of working together. One would think that solving homelessness and creating housing for everybody shouldn't be a red issue or a blue issue. It should just be a human issue. And as we know, the housing battle in California is not drawn down traditional political lines. It's not like Democrats are good on this issue and Republicans are bad, or Republicans are good and Democrats are bad. There's some very strong pro-housing Democrats and Republicans, and there are some very anti-housing Democrats and Republicans. In a place like San Francisco, where every elected official is a Democrat, there are plenty of very good, strong pro-housing Democrats. We mentioned State Senator Scott Wiener, Mayor London Breed, and there are plenty of Democrats in San Francisco who are not supportive of housing. And I'd say that that their voting record is clearly anti-housing. And there's got to be political consequences for those folks. None of this is going to change unless we change the politics and get people who want to put roofs over people's heads into political office and start to change the political will in order to house everybody.
Excellent. Well, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today and for being a beacon of light in San Francisco and trying to be a profile of courage, trying to make a difference instead of complain. And Corey, once again, thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.
Thank you so much for having me.